A screen idol dies after emergency surgery, and millions refuse to believe a ruptured ulcer could be enough. A billionaire vanishes into hotel suites, and the public decides one forbidden disease must explain everything. A star the studios built with pills becomes proof of weakness the same studios helped create. A woman climbs a giant ladder above Los Angeles, and the image swallows life. Tonight, we follow rumor, evidence, headlines, and memory through old Hollywood's saddest myths. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there tonight. Rudolph Valentino. The rumor came first. Rudolph Valentino, the irresistible star of the Shake, could not possibly die from something as ordinary as abdominal illness, so almost at once, people reached for darker explanations. Poison, enemies, curses, even messages from beyond the grave. In New York, when Valentino collapsed in August 1926, the facts were frightening enough without invention. He was taken to the hospital, underwent emergency surgery, and doctors found a ruptured ulcer with serious complications involving his appendix and infection. But that sounded small beside the size of his fame. Millions had turned him into a fantasy. They wanted a death worthy of myth. Newspapers understood that instantly. Sensational coverage fed suspicion, and nationwide mourning turned into spectacle. Crowds gathered, women fainted, opportunists staged seances. Rumor became part of grief itself. The real decline was brutally short, not theatrical. Valentino had been working, traveling, and carrying the strain of celebrity until his body failed in public, painful, medically documented fashion. The emotional aftermath mattered almost as much as the medical one. His fans were not just mourning a man. They were defending an illusion Hollywood had sold them. And once that illusion cracked, the press rushed in to repair it with drama. The evidence simply is not there for murder or mystery. History tells a sadder story. America could accept the death of a star only by refusing the truth in the end. And that instinct would haunt Hollywood again. Howard Hughes. The myth around Howard Hughes sounded irresistible because it borrowed a disease the public already associated with scandal and decline. By the time he was living in isolation in Las Vegas, gaunt, secretive, and increasingly unreachable, many people decided the answer had to be neurosyphilis. It fit the tone of a fallen tycoon. It also fit Hollywood's appetite for moral punishment. But Hughes's real story was more tangled. He was an aviation visionary behind Hughes Aircraft and producer of Hell's Angels. He also survived multiple plane crashes that left him with lasting pain. Contemporary accounts and later biographers describe OCD symptoms, extreme fear of contamination, dependence on prescription painkillers, and a final life narrowed to darkened rooms and routine. That was enough to look mythic all by itself. The rumor spread because the symptoms were public while the records were private. People saw deterioration and supplied their own diagnosis. Yet later medical reviews and biographical research have generally argued against the famous neurosyphilis claim. The stronger evidence points toward chronic pain, trauma, obsessive behavior, malnutrition, and drug dependence combining into a devastating decline. That makes his ending harder to package. The verdict here is not simple innocence or simple guilt. It is complexity. The public wanted one shocking cause. History leaves us with something messier, lonelier, and far more believable. Judy Garland. The rumor says Judy Garland destroyed herself. It is cruel and incomplete. By the time she died in London at age 47, that version was easy to sell publicly. But history begins much earlier, inside MGM, where Garland was a managed product. After The Wizard of Oz made her immortal, the same studio system that polished her image controlled her body, sleep, weight, and energy. Amphetamines helped keep her working. Sleeping pills helped bring her down. That damage began when she was still very young. That cycle was not discovered at the end of her life. It was built into the machinery around her while she was still young. People believed the myth of personal collapse because it flatteringly removed Hollywood from the story. If Garland was only reckless, the industry remained innocent. But the verified facts point somewhere harsher. Years of studio control, relentless performance pressure, financial instability, and dependence on pills shaped the decline everyone later called inevitable. Her death in London in 1969 was ruled an accidental overdose of barbiturates, not a glamorous mystery. What lingers is the emotional cost. Audiences mourned the child they remembered and judged the woman they misunderstood. The verdict is clear. Judy Garland's tragedy was personal, but also industrial. Hollywood helped create the very dependency it later pretended merely to witness. Then other legends look less like scandal and more like evidence. Mabel Normand. The myth around Mabel Normand was simple. Scandal ruined her because scandal exposed who she really was. That was the version audiences learned to repeat. She had risen with Mack Sennett, become one of silent comedy's defining faces, and appeared with Charlie Chaplin. But once her name was tied in headlines to the William Desmond Taylor murder and later rumors, truth stopped being the point. People believed the worst because Hollywood already looked like a machine for hiding vice behind charm. Normand fit that picture too neatly, yet the verified record is sadder than the legend. She was questioned in the Taylor case, but never charged. Meanwhile, tuberculosis was steadily damaging her health and limiting her work. The real decline was physical, professional, and public all at once. As newspapers kept recycling scandal, sympathy drained away. That may be the hardest part to watch in hindsight. A gifted pioneer became easier to discuss as a rumor than as a suffering person. The verdict is clear. Scandal grew larger than truth. Her audience vanished before the evidence ever truly did. And once that happened, Mabel Normand's public image never really recovered. Montgomery Clift. The myth says Montgomery Clift was destroyed in one night. There is a reason people tell it that way. A life divided cleanly into before and after feels dramatic, visible, cinematic. Clift already seemed too delicate for stardom even before the crash, with the intensity he brought to films like A Place in the Sun and the seriousness that set him apart from Hollywood's mythology. Then came the 1956 car accident after leaving Elizabeth Taylor's home. He underwent reconstructive surgery. His face changed. From then on, rumor did the rest. People believed the crash explained everything. The pain, the drinking, the pills, the emotional decline, the haunted quality that later clung to his screen image. But that version is too tidy. The accident mattered, but it did not replace the rest of his life. It intensified existing vulnerabilities and trapped him in chronic pain, dependence, and long recovery. The real decline was slower, more private, and more exhausting than the legend allows. What audiences interpreted as mystery was often suffering under pressure. What gossip columns sold as self-destruction was also survival while damaged. That distinction matters. The verdict is that the crash was real, transformative, and devastating. But the myth turned a long struggle into a single scene. History gives us a person, not just an iconic wreck. That matters. John Barrymore. The legend most people remember about John Barrymore is a collapse into drunken self-parody, as if one gifted man drank away an entire dynasty. But even that story became distorted. Barrymore had once been celebrated as Hamlet, a stage titan before film made him a mass celebrity. As the years passed, alcoholism damaged his health and failing memory, and the decline became painfully visible. Audiences saw a tragic genius in ruins. Then family mythology did the rest. The public began treating John as the single emblem of Barrymore doom, when the larger legend stretched back through his father, Maurice Barrymore, and a family already shaped by performance, inheritance, and public drama. That does not erase John's responsibility. It does show how biography became folklore. His deterioration was real. The curse was not. The verdict is that Hollywood remembered the wrong Barrymore in the wrong way, turning one man's collapse into a simplified family myth that was easier to repeat than to understand. And because he had once seemed larger than life, the public mistook inherited legend for historical explanation itself. Frances Farmer. The most famous rumor about Frances Farmer is the one that best reveals how Hollywood myth works. They say they know exactly how. The rebel from Seattle was crushed by the system, brutalized in psychiatric institutions, and finally given a lobotomy. It is a story told with confidence. That confidence is the problem. Farmer absolutely did endure institutionalization, family conflict, and years of personal collapse. Abuse allegations have followed her story for decades, so the darkness around her life is not invented. But the single most famous claim, the lobotomy rumor, remains historically disputed. Modern researchers have found no confirmed evidence that it happened, despite how often retellings present it as settled fact. People believed it because it completed the morality play. Hollywood destroys a difficult woman, then medicine finishes the job. It is also repeated until it hardens into certainty. The real decline was slower and less cinematic. Arrests, psychiatric commitments, treatment, damaged reputation, lost work, and a life increasingly narrated by others. Farmer's story became a battleground where real suffering and embellished legend fused together. The verdict must stay careful. Some abuse is documented. Some allegations remain unresolved. The lobotomy story has never been confirmed. History does not clear the institutions or the culture surrounding them. It does require us to separate evidence from the version that became famous. And after that chapter, Hollywood's myths begin to feel less romantic than predatory. That distinction matters more than myths. Vivien Leigh. The rumor around Vivien Leigh was quieter than the others, but no less distorting. Audiences saw the radiant star of Gone with the Wind, then later saw volatility, exhaustion, canceled performances, and a marriage to Laurence Olivier tested in public. The easiest explanation became the durable one. She was simply impossible. But that language flattened a life into spectacle. Later accounts identified bipolar disorder as part of her history, while tuberculosis, which killed her in 1967, shaped her final years in ways the public often overlooked. People believed the myth because public attitudes toward illness were still shallow and punitive. So behavior became gossip, and suffering became persona. The true decline was not one dramatic collapse, but a long contest between brilliance, work, physical illness, and episodes those around her struggled to understand. The verdict is not that Vivien Leigh was unknowable. It is that the public preferred mystery to compassion. History asks for more dignity than that. And after Frances Farmer, that distinction matters more than ever. Olivier could not protect her from that misunderstanding, and fame made every visible struggle look theatrical. What audiences barely recognized was that elegance on screen could exist beside genuine suffering off screen. Al Capone. By the time rumor reached Howard Hughes, the public already had a template for what neurosyphilis looked like, and that template had a face. Al Capone. Here the story is not mostly myth. It is documentation. Capone built his empire in Chicago, went to prison on tax evasion, and entered confinement with untreated syphilis already in his past. Over time, the disease advanced into neurosyphilis, and the medical record describes the cognitive decline that followed. This is the case people later borrowed when they wanted a sensational explanation for someone else's deterioration. But Capone's story was different because the evidence exists. Prison did not create the disease, though confinement made the damage harder to ignore. By the end, the decline was not just criminal legend or newspaper invention. It was observed, recorded, and tragically visible. That matters because this chapter changes the scale of the whole documentary. After so many rumors, here is what a genuine medically documented decline actually looked like. Not glamorous, not poetic, not useful as metaphor. Just devastating. The verdict is simple and sad. This one is true. And because it was true, Hollywood and the press later borrowed its shape whenever they wanted to make another decline sound darker than the evidence allowed. For decades. Peg Entwistle. The myth is so powerful that it nearly erases the person. Mention Peg Entwistle, and most people do not picture an actress or a young woman trying to survive a brutal industry. They picture the Hollywood sign. More precisely, they picture September 1932, Mount Lee, the giant Hollywoodland letters, and one haunting image repeated until it becomes larger than any biography. The facts are tragic enough. Entwistle's career had stalled after stage promise and only limited film work. She died by suicide after climbing the sign, and the story quickly hardened into a symbol of Hollywood's broken dreams. That is why people believed every embellishment that followed. The image felt too perfect. A failed career, a famous hill, a city built on ambition. It seemed to explain all Hollywood in one shot. But myth versus reality matters even here. Peg Entwistle was not born as a symbol. She was turned into one. The lasting cultural symbol came later, when newspapers, retellings, and Hollywood itself kept returning to that silhouette and letting it stand for every ruined hope. The real sadness is smaller and more human. A person disappeared into an emblem. The verdict is that the image endured because it was irresistible, but history asks us to remember the woman before the landmark swallowed her. That is Hollywood's haunting habit. Hollywood created unforgettable stars, but sometimes it also created unforgettable myths, then let headlines preserve them as history. Tonight, rumor met evidence, and legend met record. Which story surprised you the most, and which Hollywood myth do you still wonder about? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell for more untold stories.